Hi and welcome to another of the DTA screencasts, and in today's session we're going to be looking at Australia. Things that we need to do are describe the characteristics of Australia, look at the nature of the sport, and also analyse the game of Australian rules football. So we'll get started straight away. So Australia is a vast country, and with that it has a lot of positive things in relation to sport and some negative things. So let's look at some basic facts first of all. There's an indigenous population, and they're known as the Aboriginals, and these are the people who were on the country before the Western Europeans. And the first Europeans that set down there was James Cook in 1770. He actually sailed down this coast here, actually stopped at Fraser Island, but it's made of sand, so he decided to move on and eventually moved down to Byron Bay, and then Botany Bay, and down to what's known as Sydney today. Other things, it's a relatively young nation. The population isn't that old, and it's sparsely populated. What that means is very similar to America. It's usually at the extremes. So on the western coast here you have Perth, and on the eastern coast you have Sydney. You also have Melbourne, which is down here, and also Queensland right at the top there. And there's a large colonial influence. There used to be a colony of Great Britain, as I'm sure most of you know, and there was also a vast amount of immigration from lots of other countries in the last 100 years. So what we need to know for us is, how does that actually impact on sport? Well, because it's a young nation and a large country, it has lots and lots of space to actually play. So it's not an issue. If you think of central London or parts of Britain, space can be an issue. It's not over there. The colonial influence is the sense that they have a lot of our sports. So if you think of what Australia are good at sports, you think of cricket, rugby, and arguably tennis as well, and I'm sure you can think of a few others. Because it's a young nation, they're very, very active, lots of energy to go out and take part in physical activity, and because of this immigration you have a wide variety of influences on their sports. So we mentioned the indigenous population. What I want you to try and think about is how this colonial influence may have impacted on the Aboriginal sports and their development. Just a food for thought. Alright, so let's look at sport in itself in Australia. It is a national pastime, and just try and put this into context for you. When we won the Ashes, the last two times we won the Ashes, 12.5% of the population watched. However, when a single horse in Australia won the Melbourne Cup in 2004, 90% of Australians actually watched. So you can see there's a huge difference in the popularity of sport between our two countries. So it's actually a pastime, and part of the reason for that, and these are the things we need to note, are that sporting articles a lot of the time appear on the front pages of papers, but traditionally in this country, as I'm sure you know, most sporting stories appear on the back pages. Most people have a direct or indirect link to sport. So that would be someone in their family taking part in sport or being part of a sports team, them knowing of somebody else who takes part in a sports team, or generally having quite a high level of interest. And the other thing that we need to identify is this. I'm sure you've heard of the term test match. Let's say, for example, when England play against Australia at cricket, they call it a test match. And as we mentioned the colonial influence before, the reason it became called a test match, it was the Australians testing themselves against their mother country, which is us. So they're challenging themselves against their parents, so to speak. And it's another way of them encouraging this idea of sports within their country. And I don't want you to try and fall into the trap of stereotype. It's just the guys that take part, and it's just the guys that support it. Over there, there is almost as many females that take part and enjoy watching sport as females. So if you think of 90% of people, 50% of that have to be male, so another 40% is clearly female, or it's 45 and 45, but you understand the point. Other things that would help them increase this popularity of sport is huge sporting events, and hopefully you'll be able to remember the year that the Olympics were in Sydney. Yep, it was 2000. So having those events will also encourage people to take part. So why is sport so popular, and why does it have such a high status in Australia? So one of the reasons that we can identify is the favourable climate. I'm sure when we think of Australia, we think of the sunshine, and you're absolutely right. It is very sunny there. So that allows them to take part in activities outside. And that's not only for mass participation, so for you and I, but also for elite athletes to do warm weather training or just to take part in activity outside. Leading on from that, it's become the norm. In other words, normal activity is to be outside. So again, this encourages people to take part in physical activity or sport. The other things are that it's quite trendy. So if you think of sports like surfing, mountain biking, those extreme sports, you can take part in all of those in Australia because they have the topographics, in other words the land, to be able to do that. And the other aspect would be role models. They have lots of success, so therefore lots of role models for the youth to look up to. Other things that you may not have identified is the political support that they get. In other words, the government sees the benefits of people taking part in physical activity. If you think of if your nation's healthier, then they're going to have less of an impact on your National Health Service, and also politicians have identified that having people taking part in physical activity makes them look good if they're encouraging it. You also have a high status of PE and sports within schools. In this country, you could argue that it has a lower status than a lot of other subjects, but that's not the case in Australia. They recognise the importance and significance and the benefits of sport and PE, so it holds quite a high status. And you'll also get the media coming to some of the larger sporting events. And one of the last ones we'll look at is this egalitarian society. So what that means is, as it says there, is everybody's classified as equal within sport in that country. So there's no difference for opportunity, provision and esteem. You could argue that in the UK, if you are of a certain status, upper class, comparatively to lower class, you have more opportunity to take part in physical activity. Where in the Australian society, that's not deemed to be the case. Okay, and the last point we'll make regarding this is the concept of a bush culture. What this means is very similar to America. That idea of the frontier spirit is the Australians have this idea of the bush culture being a manly, rugged guy who can last in the outback, and is supposed to be very physical. And they imply that there are similar demands to this and one of their actual sports. Okay, so one of the ways that we try and remember this is we look at a better cop. So BETERCOP. So it's a better cop. If you can remember that, then you should be able to hit quite a few of the requirements you need if there's any question regarding the status of sport in Australia, which there usually is. Okay, so it's a better cop. Alright, and then the last thing that we're going to look at is the Aussie rules football. It's known as ARL or footy if you're in Australia, and one of the questions that usually comes up is regarding the origins. Some people turn around and say it's about the Aboriginal leaping game. Others have implied, with some evidence, that Tom Willis designed the game for off-season cricket players. There are some links to Gaelic football, but they've sort of been dismissed. And as I mentioned before, it's a reflection of the characteristics of Australia within the sport. So we'll have a look at that if we can. Okay, so you can see there that it's pretty popular, and it's quite an intense game. We'll have a look at more of that video during one of the sessions. So we'll just move on then. So the last point that we're looking at here is the commercial nature of Australian rules, and the game, as you could see, was very, very popular. And what that allows is, well, actually, just going back to that point, it's now more popular than rugby league and rugby union. It's the fourth most popular team game in the entire country, and it's because it's a high pace and high impact, as you saw. So that means loads and loads of people go. What it also means is that sponsors and the commercial aspect are very, very interested in the game, and because there are plenty of breaks, that allows adverts. And as I mentioned, we've got these sponsors who are very interested in it, but that gives financial backing to the players now. So therefore you can actually earn a living from it, and it creates this vehicle to achieve wealth, very similar to American football in the States. And the last thing is that because of that, there's now a greater investment in the infrastructure and local and regional leagues, so it makes it a very, very popular game. Alright, so what we'll do in our next session is look at the factors shaping the development of the game in a little bit more detail. Okay, thanks very much.